Okay, I'll try and make this as brief as possible because of the ambience being a little overwhelming. Yeah, huddle. That won't attract any attention. Okay, I suppose my presence here tonight is really one of a little bit of education, insofar as I'd like to raise the awareness in people like yourselves of the idea of replication as a route to artificial intelligence. Being people who are very interested in the singularity, and the singularity being associated with hyperintelligence or the arising of hyperintelligence, the normal association that everyone has is with computation or computers. And I'm here to change that perception a little by introducing another alternative approach, which is replication. Now, replication is an approach to technology that is as old as science and far older than computers. If you want an example of replication, it's easy to consider things like a caveman with fire. A caveman with fire made artificial fire by feeding a natural bit of fire artificially. The Wright brothers figured out how to fly by flying, by replicating flight. They got bits of materials and they stuck it in a wind tunnel, and they examined the lift and drag phenomena, and they figured out that some things lift more than others and some things drag more than others, and eventually they figured out how to fly like 20 feet or something. It's a way of doing science by using the physics itself. Now, there's a very unusual story about replication in this particular era, because that at the time when brain neuroscience was undergoing a huge change in the 1950s, when Hodgkin and Huxley did their initial work on action potentials in the squid axon, at the same time Alan Turing was fiddling about with computation, and computers were finally being made, and everybody leapt onto what we now call simulation. Now, does anyone have any would anyone have called what the Wright brothers did simulation? Because I've run across people who do that. They actually think that they're simulating flight. They're not actually simulating flight. The Wright brothers were replicating flight. And so at the time we had this burgeoning knowledge of brains, and we had a sudden appearance of this really nifty tool called computers, and something happened and we became almost on an industrial scale focused on machine intelligence being entirely as a result of computers. And absolutely no investment whatsoever has ever been made in any concerted way to look at replication as a way of doing neuroscience, examining how brains work, or making an artificial brain. In comparison, year after year for the last half century, people have been investing exponentially increasing amounts of money in computer modelling or simulation of brain material as a route to artificial intelligence. So I'd like to implant in your brains, as a seed for a slight shift in thinking, another alternative where we actually recreate the physics of brain material, literally, and create an artificial version of the generated physics of it, and then use that as a way of exploring how brains work, and then as a vehicle for continuing on into artificial machines or thinking machines that don't have computation in them at all. They're simply the physics replicated like flight was replicated by the Wright brothers. So to do that, you need to know what is the physics of a brain. And we now know there are two basic things to do. Firstly, there is a whole pile of action potentials. and they are as old as Hodgkin and Huxley's work. The other thing that it does is produces an incredibly complicated electromagnetic field, which in the last 2 years has been proved to be active. The field itself changes the action potentials, and the action potentials generate the field. And the resonance between these two things is what creates the brain. So a bit of technology that replicates brain function would produce a signalling system like action potentials in recurrent loops that also produces the electromagnetic fields as they are produced in a brain. And with that device replicated again and again and again and nested inside self-similar groupings of similar devices, and then on and on and on, like a brain, you can then start to explore something akin to a piece of inorganic brain tissue. So, I mean, that's the essential message of my screaming tonight. And I'd like to plant that and let you have a think about it, because I suspect that it's going to play a more important part in the process of artificial intelligence than it has in the past. Well, non-zero, which is zero is what it's had to date, which is really unusual in science. In science, normally what you do is you want to make something, you get something artificial, an artificial version of a natural thing. You normally get the actual physics together and build a model, a physical model of it. Like a model plane flies, right? We haven't done that for neuroscience yet. It's really unusual. So I'd like to plant that seed and leave you to think about it. Especially since if I keep going, I'm going to go very hoarse very soon. So thank you.
Can I ask, any of your research so far, have you uncovered any interesting phenomena with replicating the physics environment in your work that was something you hadn't thought of before, like a black swan?
The answer to that is no, and the reason is that when you suggest using replication to a funding body that you need to help you build one of these things, they go, what? They don't understand that we've been not replicating in neuroscience for so long, over 4 generations, that they don't even understand that it's an option. And so they think we don't do this, so they don't give money. And I'm trying to convince people that maybe a little bit of money would be useful, and then I'll be able to come to you and say, yes, Adam, I discovered this really weird phenomena when I replicated this tissue, and it's as follows. I live in hope of being able to do that sooner rather than later, because life's too short.
I find the experiment very interesting. I think that even if you do not model general intelligence by trying to replicate the physics environment, I think there's a high probability of some unexpected phenomena will be discovered as a fallout from conducting these forms of experiments. Have you got any sorts of infrastructure in place to be able to record these sorts of unexpected fallouts?
The answer is yes. I have a fairly well-developed plan which involves an experiment in a Faraday cage with these basic devices that I just described. And there is a prototype field measurement system at the University of Melbourne that I'm planning to modify so it can measure the fields in space. And what I'm expecting is that there will be unexpected coupling between devices outside in the external world from the device that weren't predicted by the physics, the traditional physics of the device. And I think I can tease that out into something significant. What I believe it will involve is quantum mechanics, which is uninvolved in classical electromagnetism. And I think that a quantum mechanical effect will make itself felt at a macroscopic scale and change the dynamics in ways that the classical approach wouldn't predict. So,
what is it that makes you think that that's the case, that there are uniquely quantum mechanical effects at play?
It's the only way that certain brain phenomena make sense to me when you examine how perceptions occur and how we relate to things in the outside world. There is a degenerate relationship between action potentials and the view that we get of the natural world. In other words, there's not enough information in the action potentials to create what we actually get. So there's something extra, and I suspect that the something extra has its basis in quantum mechanics, which applies right at the threshold of firing. And so that's what I'll be examining. And beyond that, I have no idea. All I know that if I don't look, I'm going to wonder what it's really all about. I've really got to try it. So it's worth a look. I just have to convince people with money to do it. And I need 100,000. If anyone's got a spare 100,000, that'd be really handy. Sorry.
Have you been able to convince anybody to fund even a smaller project than 100,000 so far?
No, but I've got a whole lot of stuff in the pipeline, including some crowdsourcing, and I'm throwing some of my own money at it to sort of seed it. But there are some internal funding rounds that I'm trying to get some, tens of thousands. All I need is something to get started, and then I can continue it. So despite the history, I'm still optimistic that I'll break through. Neuroscience now has a justification because of the new role, or novel role of ephaptic coupling, electromagnetic coupling in brains. The neuroscience community is more receptive to this kind of science. So it's changed things. Since I did my PhD, everything's changed. So I remain optimistic. I think I've got one question left in my voice.
Well, it's more just a comment, perhaps. Have you looked into chemical hyperconjugation, which is a quantum mechanical effect, which hyperconjugation...
I don't know what hyperconjugation is, but if... it sounds like French verb conjugation done really fast. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I suspect the ultimate description of the quantum mechanics would have to involve that. I know conjugation in the quantum state equations, but it's not. I'm going to find it empirically, not mathematically. It'll be found and then reverse engineered in science, not the other way around. So, yeah. They're not in brains, though.
Maybe this effect needs to be examined in the context of neuroscience.
Yeah, I just love to get on with it and build the thing. It's I've got the materials in my office. I've got the fluids I need. I need to set up, believe it or not, I need a curing oven. It's more like Jamie Oliver than Stephen Hawking to build these things. It's really odd. Nested capacitors, banks of them. I have to build my own dielectric. It's quite different and really interesting. But I've got the Faraday cage. I've got the field measurement. I've got all this stuff. I need to buy expensive people with lasers to cut holes a micron across and things like that. I need to be able to bond wires 5 microns in diameter and build these things. So it's lots of fun, but no fun without any money. So I think I might leave it there. So thank you very much for listening to me over in the midst of this atmosphere. Thank you.
Atmosphere.
Colin, I'll draw a diagram of